Welcome to Deep Impact Investing with Kimberly Griego-Kiel from Horizon Sustainable Financial Services. In this podcast, we talk about sustainable investing and how your portfolio reflects your values. Do your investments seek accountability from corporations that govern more and more of our society and even the lives we lead? Listen in as we explore the question, are you investing like you give a damn?
Hello and welcome to Deep Impact Investing with Kimberly Griego-Kiel from Horizon Sustainable Financial Services. Today I'm excited to be meeting with Kim. She is podcasting from her igloo today. Hello, Kim.
Hi, Eric. Yeah, it certainly feels like I'm inside an igloo.
Yeah, you guys are buried in snow right now, and I know the entire country right now is in pretty low temperatures. But My goodness, you guys are getting another dumping of snow right now, I think, right?
We are. It's still snowing today, and there's at least a foot, if not more, outside the house. Ugh. So
I remember when I was a kid and I loved snow. What happened? It's just not my thing anymore. I don't know.
Well, I don't think children are actually appreciating the snow right now because there's no snow days.
Oh, that's true. Yeah. That's very true. All right. Well, today I know we're talking about CSR. That's what you told me that before we started the podcast. But Kim, I got to ask, what is CSR?
All right. Let's talk about that. CSR is Corporate Sustainability Reporting.
Okay.
And we've mentioned that before, but we've never talked about it in depth. Mm-hmm. So we're going to go in depth on exactly what corporate sustainability reporting is and why it's important.
Okay. Well, I mean, I can already tell why it's important. We need those reports. We need to know what's going on, but I've got so many questions. I'm not going to just barrage you with questions, but why don't you start off and kind of give us that overview, and then I know questions will come as we go.
Usually when we talk about corporate sustainability reporting, we're talking about an annual report that companies publish with specific goals in mind of sharing their social and sustainability responsible actions and results, which sounds kind of vague, right?
Yeah.
So let's talk about what that means. And in our industry, many companies believe that they'll create a better long-term value by embracing this opportunity to share this information. There's a lot of companies who don't necessarily want to do that. We won't name some of those companies, but they might come to mind. What we're talking about is these corporations want to improve on their long-term value and manage their risks. And what they're doing is developing their ESG results in these reports. And if you remember, ESG is environmental, social, and governance. Mm-hmm. So beyond that, they're looking at doing a bit of a deeper dive in terms of sharing that information with the public. Mm-hmm. Sounds good, right? So why don't they all do it?
Mm-hmm. That's one question. And then, I'm sure you'll get into this also, but where's the accountability? Where are the standards? There's so many things out there that need to be answered. I know that probably a lot of companies look at this as an opportunity to make themselves look better in the public eye as well. So it's almost like a marketing opportunity in a way too, right?
It could be absolutely a marketing opportunity. And right now there are no standards because it's not a requirement. So the companies who are doing this are doing it voluntarily.
How long has this been going on?
Well, it goes back to the 80s. Some companies started to do this voluntarily. And in the 1980s, there were environmental reporting from some companies. They started publishing these reports, environmental reports, and it happened mainly in the chemical industry, which, as we know, had some very serious problems back in the 70s and 80s. And so what they did was they started to do environmental reporting to make themselves look a little bit better and talk about the things that they were doing to kind of get themselves out of trouble. And boost their image. No, they were just boosting their image, yeah.
Well, I guess my question is, how involved was the EPA in these companies making this decision, I would think that the Environmental Protection Agency would have some sort of guidelines that companies would have to follow, and they would be the ones pushing for this. Is that the case? Or
I
no?
believe that's true, yes. So
Okay.
when we got around into the 80s, there were some requirements for EPA reporting and environmental reports. So that's where this started. Those had some specific guidelines, but it wasn't all encompassing on all of the bigger issues that we saw and were having in terms of climate change and other environmental issues. So it was just those specific issues. There were other companies that had issues, like the tobacco industry, right?
Oh, yeah.
And so they started doing a similar type of thing because they also had image issues, big image issues.
Yeah.
During that time. There was also a smaller subset of early reporters, mostly small and medium-sized companies that were doing what we would consider advanced environmental work. So this was a positive, not a negative. And they were kind of putting it out there to promote the good that they were doing. But it wasn't the big corporate sustainability reporting that we're now seeing, which we'll talk a little bit more about.
Okay.
So I think it's important also that we don't forget that these reports don't just provide information about the negative stuff. What we're really seeing is kind of the good and the bad and, kind of the ugly, right? So it's a big all-encompassing report here. The goal here is to work on progress and making change. And that's kind of the point of a corporate social responsibility report.
Yeah. So with this report, is there a standardized checklist? I don't even know how to phrase this checklist, or the things that they're supposed to be reporting. I know it's voluntary for a lot of these companies, but is it something where there is specifics that they have to do, or can they just kind of leave certain things out that maybe aren't going to be favorable, and so they're not going to just report those?
Well, that is a challenge, and we are going to talk about the challenges in a minute.
Okay.
Because there is no standard reporting in the U.S., and it's not mandatory.
Yeah.
It is in Europe.
Okay, so wow.
Yeah.
See, again, Europe. Way to go, Europe.
Yeah, I know. They're so much farther ahead. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're so much farther ahead of us in a lot of these things. And, what we really need is the goal of getting some sort of standard and a mandatory reporting process. But it's a pretty big goal, considering the 4 years we've just come out of. We have so many things to work towards. So I think this might take us a little bit while longer to get to this process, but we can.
Yeah.
It's very impactful and getting changes on ESG issues by having a corporate sustainability report and a minimum standard. So I'd like to see big standards, but we really need some minimum standard. And it shouldn't be voluntary. It should be some sort of mandatory practice that corporations share this information and really tout the good they're doing and the progress that they might be making towards environmental, social, and governance issues. So, yeah. Let's talk about the why it's important beyond just those pieces. I think the most important reason or purpose really behind a CSR report is the value of the impact corporations are making on all of these ESG issues. And having a corporation itself really consider their personal impact. Without a CSR report, they can kind of put those things in the background.
Yeah, absolutely.
And not really pay attention to that. So we know there's a lot of companies and big corporations out there who really do care. And there's a lot of corporations who just kind of wash over it, and a lot of corporations who maybe don't really care. It's not something they pay attention to. But if there were mandatory CSR reporting, then they would kind of be forced to pay attention.
Yeah.
And pay attention to the impact.
Well, here's this is going to really simplify it for my own brain. But the way I look at it is that, if they're not required to do it and there's no standardization as far as what they're looking at, like you said, companies can turn a blind eye to it. And it's not necessarily that somebody has, evil in their heart and they're like, we're going to, pour this oil down the drain. Ha ha ha. It's really it's more like me, my clothes are on the floor on the side of my bed and I walk by, I'm like, I got to get those picked up. I got to get those picked up. 3 or 4 days later, my wife's like, pick those up.
Yeah, exactly.
Then guess what I do? I pick them up because there's accountability. Right. There's somebody else telling me, hey, you need to do this because I'm not going to live in the sty with you anymore. And I think that if we do that with these corporations, say, look, you need to have these reports so we know that you're making progress towards cleaning up your act because I refuse to live in the sty you're helping to create.
Exactly.
Again, I don't think there's just necessarily evil amuck, out there. I'm sure there are some that are just very greedy for cash. But I totally see the why in this for sure.
Right. Which you just mentioned, cash. Success in this process is more than just profit. Mm-hmm. And what I mean by that is there's non-financial performance, which is a leading indicator for a company's long-term profit in this process. ESG metrics really help a business recognize when their strategies need an overhaul in this whole process.
Yeah.
If they're not paying attention to these factors, their long-term performance will likely suffer. We can see that in oil companies, in many industries that are not paying attention to the long-term process of, let's just focus on oil companies, for example.
Sure.
We know extraction of oil is not going to be financially feasible long-term. It's going to continue to cost more and more. These companies are not going to be able to continue this process because people are not going to pay $10 a gallon for oil. It's going to bring up prices of so many products that we use. If you realize, many people don't realize, I guess, is a good way to put it, that there are so many products in our life that contain oil in them. Plastics. Do you realize how... I'm just sitting here looking at my desk and all of the products on my desk that have plastic in them, whether we want them to or not.
Yeah, I just, as you were talking, I took a drink out of the cup that's on my desk. It's actually a cup that I got from the movie theater. And that was obviously from 2019 because we didn't go to the movies in 2020. I keep these cups for a long time because they're hard plastic, and that's what you get when you order a large drink.
Right.
But I guarantee this was made with oil. I'm just holding it in my hand right now going, I'm sustaining this at my house. I didn't throw it away, so I'm proud of myself for that. But doggone it, this is definitely made with oil. Yeah, you're right.
Right. Huh. Well, I have a vitamin bottle. I have a tube of lotion. I have reading glasses. I have chapstick. Should I go on? It's like, really? Wow, it's a lot. So it's interesting. So we have to think about that. And, ESG assessments really do help identify these practices, and they're all associated with future risk. So corporations really should be paying attention to that. There's also the issue of transparency. And here's some statistics, and I know you love these. There was a TD Ameritrade survey, and it showed that 67% of ESG investors care more about advancing social and environmental causes than their investment's rate of return.
That's powerful.
It is powerful, right? And then we know this. We've seen so many studies over the last decade that millennials, which are, it's hard to believe because I have 2 of them, they're nearly a quarter of the U.S. population. And they really do show a tendency of associating with companies, whether it's work or investing or where they buy their products from, but they associate with companies with a strong purpose and ethical governance standards and environmental standards and social justice standards. So they're focusing on these companies, and they want to know what they're doing.
Yeah, that is awesome.
Yeah. And I think also the generations behind them as well. There's also a 2015 Nielsen study, and everybody knows Nielsen, right? Of 30,000 consumers in 60 countries. So this is a pretty broad study. And they reported that 73% of millennials are willing to pay more for sustainable goods and products. And I think I mentioned this in a previous podcast. Millennials are really moving us to do better.
Mm-hmm. I agree.
So, yeah. And so I want to talk about the challenges. As I did mention, we would go to that piece.
Yeah, I just want to say one thing that, and of course, is a proud papa moment, but my daughter actually was telling me that she has gotten in the habit of shopping online. When she shops online, she will go to a certain site that everybody knows. Everybody knows the site that I'm talking about that you shop on. And
Yeah.
she will find the product that she wants. Obviously, there's usually multiple listings on that site of that product. And then she will find who's selling it and see if they have their own webpage and buy it from them instead of buying it through that big, huge company that doesn't necessarily do the things well that we want them to in multiple areas of their business. I was like, are you kidding me? And I was just, that's not something that I taught her. And I was just so happy that she learned it from somebody else, or, and saw, I don't know, she might have saw it on TikTok, who knows, but she decides to go to the smaller retailer and do business there if at all possible. Now, obviously,
Good
she's
for
on a
her.
budget. Everybody's on a budget of some kind, but for her, she's willing to pay $1 or $2 more for a product that if she can buy it from a smaller retailer than the big giant. So
Wonderful.
I think that those money decisions, I think millennials are doing fantastic. She's actually not a millennial. She's younger than a millennial, but like you said, millennials are really leading the way in this. They know their dollars matter and where they spend them matters. And I love to see that.
Yes. And can I just say, I don't understand TikTok.
There's not much to understand. It's just a time suck. That's all it is. It sucks you in. And the best part of TikTok for my wife and I is we love when we come across somebody who's cooking and creating recipes, and we're like, oh, we're going to try that. And my daughter's big into that as well. And so she and my wife made these dumpling things the other day that were pretty amazing. It's like a different type of pasta that you just, anyway, whatever it was.
Right. There we go. Time suck. Okay. Challenges.
Yes. Challenges. Here we go.
Yes.
Yeah.
All right. So challenges. One of the challenges is how much data do we put in a CSR report? Mm-hmm. What's relatable to the ESG practice and the impacts? What should be disclosed? It's kind of a challenge because there's a lot of information that can be put in one. Another thing that I think is important in terms of corporations and how to describe this without getting too legalese, I guess, is there's a matter of law in the United States. What is materiality principles and control of publicly traded corporations? For example, when we're filing shareholder resolutions, sometimes they get kicked out because it's not material to the corporation, right? So the same process can be applied to a CSR report. The data that is disclosed in a CSR report must be material to the corporation and their process of business. So we want to make sure that a CSR report is related to that business's materiality process. Does that make sense?
Kim, you just mentioned filing a shareholder resolution. I just want to say something to the audience real quick. Kim did an entire podcast on this probably 8 months ago or a year ago. It was fantastic. So if you want to learn more about that, please go back to that podcast because she went in depth in it. So didn't mean to interrupt, but go ahead there, Kim.
Right. That's actually a really good podcast and is somewhat related to this. So when you're looking at CSR reporting, if you have a set standard and a company is required to report on everything, it may not be relevant to that company. Some of those pieces might not. So we have to be careful on what we say a corporation has to report on. and not everything is going to be relevant.
Yeah.
One of the biggest problems with sustainability reports is that they're often, as I was just mentioning, they're just misaligned with the company's priorities.
Mm-hmm.
So achieving that success for triple bottom line requires this balance between the social, the environmental, and economic performance. So the measures for each of those pieces and how they are weighted is going to vary from company to company.
Yeah, that makes sense.
There's kind of this fine line between what's required and what isn't. There's also, and I think you mentioned this at the beginning, or maybe I did, but there's not a uniform definition of what all of these pieces mean. And even within the social investment area that I'm working in, there's this discussion of what is the definition of environmental, social, and governance. Many people have a slightly different definition for those pieces. So we need a uniform definition of all of those. There's also multiple reporting frameworks. How do you get one? Well, there's a number of different places where you can report. So, for example, GRI, which is one of the most common, that's the Global Reporting Initiative. That's one place you can report. There's a couple of others. So corporations in the U.S. are kind of thinking, well, where do I report?
Okay.
What's the best place? They're not really sure, where they need to be doing the reporting.
So what do those organizations do then?
In terms of the reporting?
But besides gathering the reports, what are they just the ones that publish it, or they process it, or they
Yes. So you can go, for example, to the Global Reporting Initiative and look up corporations' reports and look at the data that they have presented for multiple different companies and look at the pieces. But there's no uniform data in there. It's just whatever that company has decided to report on.
Yeah. Okay. That to me, that poses a huge issue, because what if one of the companies that you're reporting to decides to soften it, or I don't know, they're not going to necessarily change the data, but report it slightly differently so it seems a little bit more in favor for the company? Well, I mean... Exactly.
And that's a challenge because there's no set standard, right?
Yeah,
so how do we overcome that? And, what's the solution? I don't specifically have the answers, but I'm going to, we'll talk about some different options and some things that I've been thinking about and others have been thinking about. And some of the key drivers of the solutions and how to overcome that is to have a good quality guideline. And as we were just talking about, the Global Reporting Initiative has a pretty good standard already in place, and is probably one of the more common places for folks to report. And they really do enable all organizations worldwide, not just in the U.S., to access their process and to have some sort of common system. And the results are very similar to financial reporting. So most corporations are using GRI, but there are some, as I mentioned, other places. So it's kind of a standard that is being set. And that is one good solution if more companies got together and started using that process. Organizations can either use this GRI standard to prepare their CSR, kind of start using that process, or they can use select standards within it. They can use the whole standard, or just kind of parcel it out to report specific pieces, and that's kind of a problem. But again, as I mentioned, some of those pieces may not be relevant to their business. So we have to kind of look at pieces and try to figure it out. One of the options that we're looking at is the global we, right? Is having the ability for corporations to provide reports for different segments of people or organizations. So, for example, a consumer report, or a report for governmental organizations, or a report for other corporations. And then those reports may look very different, but they're relevant to those specific organizations or governmental pieces. And then you can compile them into one large report. What's relevant to the consumer or the individual investor may not be relevant to the government corporation, and what's relevant to the government piece is not necessarily relevant to the individual investor. And they don't necessarily want to read those pieces, but they can then be compiled into one big report, and you have a broader CSR report. Mm-hmm. Does that make sense?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. So that would be a good standard to start with, and easier for those different components of places that need those pieces. Now, on the Global Reporting Initiative website, they have a GRI 101 program to get any corporation started, which is kind of nice. So it's a place they can register their report in their database. If they've never done one before, they can go through their little tutorial. So they can get one started, which is kind of easy process to do. They have guidance on how to focus a corporation's material topics, as we just talked about, so they can reflect their report on each corporation's significant sustainability impact and then leave out the pieces that don't apply to them. I think it makes it easy for them to kind of go through. I kind of poked around a little bit on it without doing a deep dive into the 101 program. So I think those are some great solutions to get started with. Also, what I found interesting is they have this section for articles, and their new for 2021 is a specific guidance that links their initiative and their reporting to the United Nations 17 Sustainable Development Goals with their standards.
Which we covered in podcasts.
Yeah,
absolutely.
So I thought that's great. This is just these 17 development goals are really becoming a bigger and bigger deal in all of the areas of ESG that we're seeing. And really, as I just keep mentioning over and over again, we have to create some sort of national or even global standard that's in line probably with the European standards, which are so far ahead of us.
Yeah.
So that's where I'm at. I really strongly believe that what Europe is doing is so important, and we've got to move forward and get in line with what they're doing. So
yeah, if we're going to move the needle, we have to do more. And I think everybody would agree with. Well, I think a lot of people would agree. Not everybody, but a lot of people would agree with that. And I would love just people to understand it more. And I love the fact that you bring this up, because it makes people ask questions, and hopefully they're asking questions of themselves and the business that they're doing with companies out there, and maybe questioning those companies a little bit, using a little bit more scrutiny to say, hey, do I want to spend money with this company if they're not willing to do any type of reporting?
Yes, or invest in this company, because as I mentioned, that long-term economic performance of a company is important if we're investing in it. And is it viable? Is it going to be viable long-term? Mm-hmm. So whether you want to hold shares of that company for 3 days, 3 months, or 30 years, you want to know if it's viable. And that's really important as an investor, or for us, an asset manager. Yeah.
Absolutely. Kim, great stuff today. Again, it's one of those things that I didn't know anything about this, and I love getting together with you and learning and expanding my horizons so that I can then talk to my daughter about it, because she may know this already. I'm not sure, but at least she will after I speak to her about it. So thank you so much for this.
That's great. I'm glad you share it with her. And I see what you did there, expanding your horizons.
See, I like you. You get me.
I do.
Yeah. Kim, thanks so much for your time today. This was a great podcast. Any closing thoughts as far as how people can reach you and what to do?
I was just going to say, if people want to know more about this or how to work with us in terms of investing their assets in a sustainable, impactful way with ESG metrics or sustainable metrics, they can call us at 505-986-5800. 982-9661 or email us at info@horizonssfs.com.
Fantastic. Again, Kim, thank you so much for your time today.
Thanks, Eric. It's always a pleasure to be with you.
You bet. One of these days we're going to thaw out and podcasting will be a little bit more fun. Maybe from a beach. Maybe we should talk about that.
Oh,
That'd
gosh.
Great.
A beach would be joyful. I'd love the sound of the waves in the background.
Yeah, and I hope to you, the listener, that you're able to listen to this podcast on a beach sometime, someplace. Hopefully you're all warm. But mostly we want to thank you for the Deep Impact Investing Podcast with Kimberly Griego-Kiel. If you have not subscribed to the podcast yet, please click the subscribe now button below. This way, when Kim comes out with a new podcast, it'll show up directly on your listening device. This makes it much easier to share these podcasts with your friends and family. Again, thanks for listening today. For everyone at Horizon Sustainable Financial Services, this is Eric Johnson reminding you to live your best day every day. And we'll see you next time.
Thank you for listening to Deep Impact Investing Podcast, the sustainable, responsible impact investing podcast that shows you how to get your voice heard. It's time to start investing like you give a damn. To ask a question that we can answer on an upcoming podcast, email us at info@horizonssfs.com or join the conversation on Facebook at www.facebook.com/Horizons Sustainable Financial Services. Or give us a call at 505-982-9661. Don't forget to click the subscribe button to be notified when new episodes become available. The companies we may speak about during our podcast are not recommendations for investment only. You and your financial advisor can determine what the right investments are for you and your situation. Horizon Sustainable Financial Services is a registered investment advisor, registered with the state of New Mexico, and other jurisdictions were registered or exempted. The information covered and posted represents the views and opinions of the host and or guest and do not necessarily represent the views or opinions of Horizon Sustainable Financial Services. The content has been made available for informational and educational purposes only. The content is not intended to be a substitute for professional investing advice. Always seek the advice of your financial advisor or other qualified financial service provider with any questions you may have regarding your investment planning.